Thank you for joining for the Rural Development Fund Guidance webinar. This is our roadmap for the webinar. You'll be walked through the program, the application process and timeline, and learn about the many opportunities for guidance. The Rural Development Fund is available to eligible rural and small towns to support a variety of community planning efforts, redevelopment activities, and construction projects. Eligible applicants include municipal governments and other public entities that are considered rural, having 500 or fewer persons per square mile, or small, having a total population of 7,000 or fewer persons. The Rural Development Fund is administered through the Community One Stop for Growth, which is a single application portal and collaborative review process for the Commonwealth's economic development programs. This is the One Stop's development continuum, with the red boxes marking those categories and project types reviewed by the Rural Development Fund. On the Preparing for Growth side, RDF considers applications in the planning and zoning and site preparation categories. In the planning and zoning category, RDF considers a variety of community plan, zoning revision, and planning for housing projects. Under site preparation, applications that fit into the site improvements to unlock development category will be reviewed by RDF. On the catalyzing specific project side of the development continuum, under the building category, only underutilized properties, rehabilitation projects will be considered, and all infrastructure project types are eligible. When preparing your application, you will need to select the most appropriate development continuum category for your project in question 2.4. This slide and the next slide show the eligible selections that correspond with the development continuum category. Here we show the planning and zoning and site preparation selections. And here we show the eligible selections that you may pick for the building and infrastructure categories to be considered for Rural Development Fund. There are several important project parameters that will help you determine if your project aligns with RDF. For project budget, keep in mind that the maximum award for site preparation, building, and infrastructure projects is $500,000, while the maximum award for planning and zoning projects is $100,000. Match funds are not required, but projects that include a 10% match, a 10% or greater cash match will receive additional points in the application review. For timeline, the grant period is approximately 18 months, with all contracts expiring on June 30th, 2027. Your project must fit in this timeline to be considered for RDF. For the eligible use of funds, many activities are allowable for the program, including consultant fees, materials expenses, engineer design and construction contracts, and other expenses that support projects in one of the eligible development continuum categories. There are also several ineligible activities to be aware of. Projects submitted by a public entity on behalf of a non-public entity are not eligible for Rural Development Fund. Joint applications that include one or more non-rural or non-small towns applicants are not considered for Rural Development Fund. And municipal building projects are generally not allowed, with an exception for ADA-only projects. Keep in mind that these parameters are specific to the Rural Development Fund and may not apply to other one-stop programs. Here are some tips for how to be competitive. What is the key information that program reviewers will take into consideration? Reviewers will consider the project plan and need, leadership and capacity to succeed, project readiness, budget, and rural focus areas. The evaluation factors for each of these can be found in the program guidelines. There are several important questions that applicants should be attentive to, including questions 2.5 through 2.8. Question 2.5, project narrative, is your chance to sell your project by explaining the importance of it in your community and its importance at this moment in time. Tell us what community needs will be met by the project, and let us know how the project has been identified as a priority. Share what the impact will be on community and economic development once it's completed. Remember that the reviewer may not be familiar with your community or your project, so explain things thoroughly. Question 2.6, scope of work, is your chance to explain the components of your project and how they'll be accomplished. Again, the reviewers might not be familiar with the project, so tell us what's going to happen, how, when, and by whom. Here you can show that you've thoroughly thought through each part of your project and anticipated what's to come. Be sure to consider how the grant making timeline aligns with your plans. Keep in mind that the highest scoring projects will be ready to begin in FY26, not later. Question 2.7, progress to date, helps reviewers understand if the project is ready to proceed. So here you should explain any community engagement, any prior phases, such as design and engineering, any estimates or quotes that have been collected, and consideration of alternatives that have already taken place. And finally, question 2.8, anticipated outcomes and impacts. Projects that have anticipated outcomes and impacts that align with the Rural Development Fund evaluation criteria will score more highly. And there are a few attachments that you'll want to keep in mind. You should be prepared to include a cost estimate, so a quote or an estimate to substantiate the requested grant amount, and then any development continuum specific requirements, which can be viewed in the sample application templates. Additionally, if you wish to provide evidence that the project is a priority, such as in a planning document, we ask you to include the relevant pages from your document rather than an entire plan. And we have a few examples of successful applications to share as well. The town of Cheshire completed a water line replacement and pump station upgrade project. It was successful because the project plan and need were clear and the project was ready to proceed. More specifically, the project was identified as a priority in 2 existing plans. There was a clear explanation of how the failure of the existing infrastructure would impact residents, and the applicant shared that upgrades could lead to future business development. This was phase 2 of a 2-part project, and permitting was completed and the project was ready to begin upon contracting. The town of Berkeley is another successful application example. The town is preparing an economic development plan. The application was successful because they clearly indicated that there was experienced leadership in the form of their regional planning agency. The budget fit into the eligible planning category size and included a match, and the project was clear in its alignment with the rural focus areas by indicating how it would address locally relevant industries. This slide shows the FY26 round timeline. The full application opened in January, and we are now in the guidance phase. The full application submission period will be open from May 5th through June 4th, 2025. And the collaborative review and evaluation process will follow, taking place from July through September. Finally, all applicants will be notified of grant decisions in October. As noted, we're currently in the guidance phase, and there are many ways to receive guidance on your project. You can submit an expression of interest to understand if your project is eligible for one-stop programs and receive tips for preparing your application. You can watch the other program-specific one-stop webinars online, and you are encouraged to participate in office hours. There will be both general one-stop office hours as well as program-specific office hours. The Rural Development Fund's office hour will take place on April 15th at noon, and you can sign up today. We hope that you will join then and avail of each of these opportunities for guidance. Thank you for watching this webinar.